Modern psychology celebrates self-awareness as the apex of human evolution. Yet beneath this brilliance lies a quieter, more insidious fatigue. When consciousness becomes constant observation, life turns into a laboratory, and the self becomes both subject and examiner. Neuroscientific studies now suggest that sustained introspection activates the same neural circuits as chronic stress, leading to emotional depletion masked as insight. You begin to see everything: motives, projections, patterns, until perception itself becomes heavy. This is the paradox of awareness. The very tool meant to liberate you can, without balance, become the source of your quietest burnout. Part 1. The silent pressure to be a good mind. There's a subtle kind of exhaustion spreading through the modern psyche. The fatigue of trying to be endlessly aware. In an age that worships consciousness, we are told that enlightenment is the ultimate achievement: to know ourselves, to observe without judgment, to rise above reactive emotion. Yet beneath this cultural ideal lies an invisible pressure, the demand to be a good mind. The cult of consciousness began as a movement toward healing. Mindfulness therapy, self-inquiry. These tools promised freedom from unconscious behavior. But somewhere along the way, awareness became a social performance. We learned to showcase insight as proof of intelligence, calm as evidence of maturity. To be emotionally fluent is to be admired. To be unaware is to be uncivilized. In this new moral landscape, emotional composure becomes currency and introspection a quiet competition. Psychologically, this creates what researchers call metacognitive load, the constant awareness of one's own thoughts and feelings while managing the image of being aware. It's a loop of self-monitoring that subtly mirrors surveillance systems. We become both the observer and the observed. The brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-evaluation, remains chronically active, increasing cortisol levels associated with stress and fatigue. What began as spiritual evolution now mimics emotional labor. But the problem isn't awareness itself, it's the expectation that we must maintain it without rest. Awareness was never meant to be sustained indefinitely. Like a muscle, it strengthens through cycles of focus and release. Yet our culture treats awakening as a fixed identity, not a dynamic state. We are rewarded for maintaining composure even when our inner world trembles. This is why so many people silently suffer while appearing enlightened, trapped in the paradox of being too awake to relax. Nowhere is this more evident than in the mindfulness trap, the paradox of trying to be peaceful. When mindfulness becomes an obligation, it transforms into subtle control. Neuroscience shows that forcing calm activates the same neural pathways as suppression. The individual may appear serene, but beneath the surface, emotional energy builds unprocessed. The pursuit of inner stillness becomes a quiet war against one's own nature. In evolutionary terms, our nervous system was never designed for constant regulation. Emotional flux, anger, sadness, excitement, confusion, all serve adaptive functions. To monitor every response is to interfere with the body's ancient rhythm of restoration. What mindfulness originally sought presence is lost in the effort to appear composed. And here lies the paradox of insight. The deeper we dive into self-knowledge, the heavier it becomes to carry. Every thought must be examined. Is this ego? Is this shadow? Is this projection? We begin to live as analysts of our own experience rather than participants in it. The mind becomes the audience instead of the actor. Over time, this over-identification with awareness fractures our spontaneity. The intuitive self, the part that laughs, cries, and moves without hesitation, grows timid under the scrutiny of analysis. What was meant to free us begins to confine us. We trade authenticity for accuracy, emotion for interpretation. The tragedy of modern consciousness isn't that we know too little. It's that we've forgotten how to stop knowing. To be a good mind has become a moral demand. Yet wisdom was never about perfect awareness. It was about rhythm, the ability to wake, to see, and to rest. Without that rhythm, even enlightenment burns out. Part 2. When awareness turns against you. There comes a moment in every journey of awakening when awareness ceases to feel like liberation and begins to resemble a burden. It happens quietly, without warning. One day you're proud of how self-aware you've become, how you can detect every trigger, analyze every emotion, and articulate every subtle shift within you. And then suddenly, the very skill that once made you feel powerful begins to imprison you. You are no longer living your experience, you are managing it. This is the feedback loop of awareness, the invisible mechanism that turns introspection into surveillance. The process is predictable notice, analyze, correct, doubt, repeat. Each cycle promises clarity, but what it truly delivers is exhaustion. Feelings become puzzles to solve rather than sensations to inhabit. The spontaneous, wordless intelligence of the body is hidden by the mind's compulsion to make sense of everything. Neuroscientific studies show that when emotional experiences are overanalyzed, the amygdala's natural release process is disrupted, keeping the stress response active longer than necessary. We don't just experience pain, we experience the awareness of pain amplified through constant reflection. Awareness without compassion transforms into control. It stops being a mirror and becomes a leash. The inner dialogue shifts from curiosity to regulation. Why did I react that way? What does this mean about me? How do I fix it? The psyche meant to explore becomes trapped in maintenance. Each moment is cross-examined for meaning, each silence dissected for insight. You begin to mistrust ease, mistaking it for unconsciousness. And so emerges the exile mindset, a state of psychological distance born from seeing too much. You recognize behavioral patterns others can't see, emotional projections. They deny dynamics, they unconsciously repeat. You understand, but you no longer belong. The world around you continues to move with a kind of blessed blindness, laughing, reacting, engaging without hesitation, while you stand at the edge, aware of every undercurrent. You are too awake to join, too conscious to pretend. This exile is not arrogance. It is isolation by perception. You read sincerity and manipulation in the same breath. You feel love and fear woven into every gesture. Connection becomes comprehension. You understand people so deeply that you stop feeling them. Evolutionary psychology would call this an overstimulated empathy network, the mirror neuron system operating without rest. It's a sensitivity that evolved for survival, now misfiring in a world of constant introspection. Yet awareness left unchecked disguises, detachment as enlightenment. Emotional distance starts to feel like strength. You begin to call it clarity, when in truth it's fatigue, the soul's way of conserving energy when it can no longer bear the weight of analysis. This is why so many spiritually inclined individuals quietly drift into apathy. The mind mistakes numbness for peace. And here lies the false virtue of understanding. The more you try to understand everything, the less space you leave for the unknown, and the unknown is where intimacy lives. True connection doesn't come from perfect interpretation. It comes from shared uncertainty. To love, to grieve, to trust, all require the courage to not over-explain. Sometimes wisdom is not expansion, but surrender. It's allowing confusion to exist without correction. It's realizing that awareness, when overextended, begins to devour the very life it seeks to comprehend. The deepest form of consciousness is not the mind's spotlight, but the soul's silence, where perception rests and existence simply breathes. Part 3. The mind that never sleeps. There is a peculiar kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work or from others but from yourself. It's the fatigue of being both the observer and the observed, the endless duty of managing your own inner world. For many who live in constant self-reflection, the mind no longer rests even in silence. It watches it, measures it, evaluates. You become the therapist, the critic, and the caretaker all at once. At first, this vigilance feels noble, an act of self-awareness, a sign of growth. But slowly the cost reveals itself. You begin to sense that your empathy toward yourself has transformed into exhaustion from yourself. What once was compassion has turned clinical procedural. You analyze your emotions as though they belonged to a patient instead of a person. And every act of self-care becomes another task on the list of internal management. Psychologists call this compassion fatigue, a condition more commonly found in caregivers and therapists. Yet for the self-aware individual, it takes on a quieter form, self-compassion fatigue. The emotional circuits meant to comfort and restore are overused. Instead of soothing, they begin to drain. Your inner dialogue, once gentle and curious, becomes sterile and administrative. You monitor your sadness instead of feeling it. You schedule your rest instead of surrendering to it. This leads to what neuroscience describes as chronic prefrontal activation. The brain's executive center staying online long after it should power down. In practical terms, it means the mind never sleeps. The same region responsible for introspection and control keeps scanning for emotional irregularities even during rest. Functional MRI studies show that individuals who engage in excessive self-monitoring display reduced activity in the brain's default mode network, the system associated with imagination, empathy, and restoration. In other words, the over-aware brain forgets how to dream. This phenomenon extends into physical life. The mindfulness trap, as researchers now term it, occurs when the act of trying to remain present becomes another layer of vigilance. The nervous system, designed to alternate between focus and relaxation, is trapped in a state of sustained alertness. You sit in meditation but can't quiet the evaluator inside. You sleep yet wake unrefreshed. The body remains braced as though waiting for the next wave of self-assessment. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. The human brain developed self-awareness as a survival advantage to anticipate, to adapt, to learn. But in the modern psychological climate where constant introspection is idealized, that same mechanism has no off switch. What once kept our ancestors alive now keeps us anxious. We've domesticated vigilance and renamed it mindfulness. And the toll doesn't stop at the mind. The body keeps the score of awareness. Chronic tension accumulates in the shoulders, the jaw, the gut, places evolution designed to respond to threat. But the threat now is internal. It's not the predator in the wild, but the relentless gaze of one's own consciousness. The muscles tighten as though bracing against the next self-judgment. Over time, this manifests as fatigue, pain, and emotional numbness. The body's quiet protest against over-analysis. If the mind could speak honestly, it might say, "Stop watching me. Start living through me." Because the body is not a concept to be managed. It's the instrument through which awareness was meant to flow. When it becomes the object of constant study, it shuts down its natural intelligence. This is the paradox of modern self-awareness. The more we try to awaken, the less we allow the system to rest. The mind that never sleeps cannot heal. The body that is always observed cannot breathe. The next stage of consciousness then may not be more awareness, but the wisdom to let awareness sleep, so life can dream again. Part 4. How to rest from yourself. At some point, awareness must learn to rest. Like any muscle, it can only remain strong when it remembers the rhythm of tension and release. Yet in our age of relentless introspection, we've forgotten that consciousness itself needs recovery. The modern mind is like a light that never turns off, always scanning, interpreting, naming, fixing. But even light, when constant, becomes blinding. What we call self-awareness can only sustain its brilliance if it occasionally returns to darkness, to the quiet, regenerative space of not knowing. To rest from awareness does not mean to become unconscious. It means to allow experience to unfold without supervision. This is what psychologists have begun calling conscious forgetfulness. The capacity to act, speak, and feel without reflexive commentary. It's a state of trust where you let the river of life carry you instead of analyzing its current. Neuroscientific studies show that during such states, often observed in creative flow dance or prayer activity in the brain's self-referential network, decreases while regions tied to sensory immersion and joy increase. In other words, when you stop monitoring yourself, you don't lose awareness, you expand it. Try doing something meaningless, not for growth, not for peace, not for content. Paint without purpose, walk without steps to count, speak without scripting the insight. This is not laziness, it's neurological recovery. By releasing the constant demand for meaning, you let awareness dissolve back into the body, into life itself. But to truly rest, one must also unlearn awareness. Over time, we've mistaken control for consciousness, believing that understanding every pattern equals freedom. Yet many of these patterns lose their grip not when understood, but when ignored. The psyche, like soil, replenishes when left fallow. Jung hinted at this when he said, "We do not heal by explaining our darkness, but by letting light and shadow coexist." To unlearn awareness is to return to curiosity, the kind that exists before knowledge. Instead of interrogating your emotions, you listen to them. Instead of naming every reaction you experience it raw, when awareness stops trying to dominate, it becomes gentle. The world begins to feel textured again, less like data, more like depth. This gentleness is what I call the middle distance, the space between knowing and being. Too close and awareness becomes control. Too far and awareness becomes ignorance. The art is in hovering, perceiving enough to stay awake, yet loose enough to remain alive. Imagine awareness not as a floodlight glaring on every floor, but as a candle, small, warm, illuminating just enough of the present to move gracefully through it. In practice, this balance can be cultivated through small, deliberate rituals. Silence your digital world for an hour, not as a detox, but as an act of return. Take a wordless walk, allowing your senses to narrate instead of your thoughts. Sit in the dark and let sound, breath, and presence reclaim their natural rhythm. These aren't spiritual techniques. They are biological recalibrations, ways of teaching the nervous system that it's safe to stop performing awareness. Evolution favored consciousness because it kept us alive. But evolution also designed cycles, waking and sleeping, effort, and rest, vigilance, and trust. When you deny rest to awareness, you break that evolutionary rhythm. The invitation then is not to abandon consciousness, but to let it breathe. The mind doesn't need to disappear to find peace. It only needs permission to pause. In this pause lies the quiet miracle of life unobserved, the reminder that existence continues beautifully, even when you stop trying to witness it. Part 5. The Gentle Return from Exile. There is a kind of wisdom that doesn't sparkle with insight, but hums quietly with rest. It's not the wisdom of knowing more, it's the wisdom of having seen enough. For years we chase understanding as though awareness were a ladder to climb. Yet every rung only leads us deeper into abstraction, away from the simplicity of being. Eventually we learn what no book or meditation app ever told us, that true maturity isn't about holding awareness constantly, but knowing when to set it down. This is wisdom without exhaustion, consciousness that flows, not grips. The mind no longer needs to track every movement of the heart or label every sensation with meaning. It trusts its own rhythm again. Modern psychology now affirms what ancient traditions long intuited, that rest and surrender are forms of intelligence. In the absence of constant control, neural networks reorganize. In stillness, emotional circuits repair. The prefrontal cortex, once hyperactive in self-monitoring, softens its hold, allowing deeper brain systems, those responsible for intuition and connection, to come alive. Forgetting, it turns out, is not a failure of awareness, but an evolution of it. When we speak of forgetting here, we don't mean ignorance. We mean graceful surrender, a deliberate pause in the pursuit of comprehension. You stop dissecting every emotion, not because you don't care, but because you finally trust that life itself is processing you. You no longer need to interpret every silence or decode every glance. You allow things to breathe. This is the return of fluid consciousness awareness that moves like water, adjusting, reflecting, but never needing to possess. And then comes the healing power of silence. Not the forced quiet of avoidance, but the silence that integrates. When the chatter of awareness dims, something profound begins to happen. The mind and body remember their alliance. For years we've lived as though awareness were a crown worn by the intellect, a light shining downward onto the body. But in stillness we discover the truth. Awareness doesn't live above us, it lives through us. Silence rebuilds trust between mind and flesh. The breath becomes teacher again. The heartbeat once ignored resumes its sacred role as metronome of presence. In neuroscience, this process is called interoceptive recalibration, the restoration of the brain's sensitivity to internal signals. As the mind stops intervening, the body's natural wisdom resurfaces. This is how overthinking gives way to embodied presence, a state where awareness no longer comments, it simply participates. And this is the beginning of the gentle return from exile. For so long, awareness separated you, turned you into the watcher of your own life. But now it begins to soften. The same consciousness that once alienated you becomes your way home. You start to see others not as patterns to analyze, but as living mysteries to feel. You walk through the world not as a detached observer, but as a participant in its quiet pulse. Evolutionarily speaking, this shift mirrors humanity's oldest truth. Survival depends on connection, not cognition alone. Awareness that isolates is incomplete. Awareness that reconnects completes the circuit. It restores belonging to self, to others, to existence itself. There is a quiet joy in this return, the joy of no longer needing to watch yourself, to be real. You realize that enlightenment was never meant to be a permanent posture, but a rhythm awakening, releasing, living, forgetting, and awakening again. In the end, awareness is not a destination, but a home you leave and come back to, over and over each time, with a little more grace. And when you finally rest there, not as the exile, but as the returned, you discover that life never stopped embracing you. You had only been watching instead of feeling it. Outro the 2-hour exile ritual. Tonight, take a 2-hour exile from yourself. No journaling, no reflection, no attempts to fix or refine. Simply exist. Eat without analyzing the flavor walk, without naming the feeling. Breathe without meaning. Let the world move through you unfiltered. Neuroscience calls this neural downshifting, the brain's restoration through intentional absence of control. In this quiet state, awareness dissolves back into the body, and the mind finally remembers it was never meant to supervise life, only to witness it. If the silence feels uncomfortable, stay there. That tension is the residue of over-awareness leaving your system. When you stop managing your experience, reality begins to breathe again. Awareness isn't a spotlight to hold forever. It's a flame to carry gently, then set down when the night calls for rest. Tonight, let it rest. Let yourself return home.